Welcome to the next session of the SECREV Cybersecurity Revolution cybersecurity event, the 24-hour live stream. It is now the time for the Human-Centric Cybersecurity Partnership to host a panel. And what we will be doing for our panel is talking about the future of Canadian cybersecurity research. This is an interesting moment for us as a group, as we are now into our last year of funding. And so we have the same questions that everybody else has, which is what's going to happen next. So we're very happy to welcome a very diverse group in terms of where they're at and the types of programs that they have. And so we'll be hoping to, by means of asking this interesting group of people, their opinions on what's going on and what will be happening for cybersecurity research, particularly in Canada. We'll hopefully be able to magically create some kind of crystal ball by means of talking to the right people at the right time. So with that, I'll just quickly say that the Human-Centric Cybersecurity Partnership is a federally funded underneath SSHRC, the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada, a group that has been funding research into cybersecurity from the social and humanities perspective, still interdisciplinary research, but being led by social sciences researchers or by researchers who are putting the humanities or the human first in the research that they're doing. I won't take up too much of your time because I think we have such an interesting panel that I want to get to listening to them. So we will turn it over for introductions from each of the groups, so that you can get an understanding of them and why they've been invited here today, the programs that they're running or they're about to run, and how that gives them a perspective on cybersecurity research. So with that, I'll turn it over to the first of our panelists, Dr. Atefeh Mashatan from Toronto Metropolitan University.
Thank you very much. Let me try to share my screen very quickly. Okay. Somebody confirm if it is moving.
Yes. Yeah, yes.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm Atefeh Mashatan from the Cybersecurity Research Lab of Toronto Metropolitan University, formerly Ryerson. And today I'm here to present the Cybersecurity Research Lab. I'd like to thank AC2P for the invitation. I'm one of the co-PIs in the partnership, and it's a pleasure to be here and be among such a esteemed panel today. Okay, so for those of you who don't know me, let me just say a few words about myself. My academic journey started in pure mathematics. I thought I was going to be a mathematician, and I had dreams about Fields Medal, things like that. Soon reality hit, and I decided to pivot to more applicable sides of mathematics. And I was so excited to see that areas of mathematics such as cryptography had applications in the real world, and I could actually do that. And that's when I moved to cryptography for my PhD at the University of Waterloo. And when I defended, it was the recession of 2008, 2009, and I realized that I had to do something, the hiring freeze and everything. I had to do something. Luckily, the type of mathematics that I was working on that had applications in cryptography was actually needed in the industry. So I left academia. I was a security consultant at CIBC. So I know a lot of how things are actually done in cybersecurity in the real world, in the financial sector. And since my return to academia in 2016, I've been trying to use my academic knowledge as well as the practical experiences that I gained in industry together. In 2016, I founded the Cybersecurity Research Lab, and I'm going to tell you more about this lab. We just covered this and who we are. So the Cybersecurity Research Lab is an academic research lab, and like any other academic research lab, but it is housed in the Ted Rogers School of Management. So I have a PhD in mathematics, but I'm a faculty member at the business school, which is very interesting. And in my department, which is information technology management, I'm not unique at all. Half of our colleagues have social science backgrounds, and half of my colleagues in our department, they have computer science, even computer engineering background. So this is the marriage of both worlds, which is, I think, we are going to get to in more depth in this very panel. I'm excited to bring those together. And our mission is to help organizations, large or small, as well as the society at large, to understand the threat landscape of cybersecurity and how some of the emerging technologies, such as Internet of Things, decentralization, blockchain technology, or the quantum computing, will change cybersecurity landscape. What is it that we can do now, or we need to continue to keep up doing in order to mitigate the threats, but also somehow use them as opportunities. So we're not just looking at the threat, we're also looking at these emerging technologies as opportunity. And as you can see in this very crowded, almost childlike slide, we've had the opportunity to collaborate with many industry partners, non-for-profit organizations, small startup companies, or even scale-up and massive organizations within Canada, also globally. And the type of research, the program of research that we have, we really try. For me, I have to state this, it was like doing a PhD all over again when I was an assistant professor, because I really wanted, and I took it upon myself to learn social sciences, information system management, research methodologies to be able to address it in a multidisciplinary fashion as well. And I learned a lot. I'm still learning. But then hopefully and thankfully, I was successful in getting funding from social sciences funding agencies, as well as NSERC, which is where I come from traditionally. Okay, these are the people very gracious to the type of funding that we have received, or even collaboration, and not necessarily receiving funding from our industry partners, but receiving a lot of support in ideation, where we're trying to understand what the gaps might be, where they come from in the real world, and try to articulate the research problem statement so that it aligns with what their needs are. And here's a list of, we don't have a lot of time, only 7 minutes, so I will go through them very, very quickly. My background in cryptography allows us to look at some of these emerging technologies. And I have students. I think it's important to say, I consider the Cybersecurity Research Lab's #1 product to be the people we train, what we call highly qualified personnel, whether they're students or postdocs or research professionals who are more senior researchers having their own PhDs. Within the HQP pool that we have at the Cybersecurity Research Lab, we have students and postdocs with mathematics background, in mathematical degrees, computer science, even some engineers, as well as business backgrounds, information system management discipline within the business school. So we're looking at in each of these projects or programs of research, we're looking at all of these aspects. So we have students and postdocs working on cryptography, whether it's on the adoption of the technology or perceptions of end users or even enterprises, or on the technical side of how we can have post-quantum resistant cryptography. Internet of Things is another one, blockchain technology, or decentralized technologies as well, and more broadly, enterprise cybersecurity challenges and opportunities. And we've been working with several of our industry partners in the finance and energy sector on helping them mitigate, come up with solutions that are going to prepare them better for the cybersecurity landscape that is emerging. We're also using, who's not using machine learning and AI tools at this point, but we've been using them for some time as a tool. Although we're not artificial intelligence scholars, we're using it and they're very, very, very effective. Current strategic projects that we have, so these are multi-year projects from Canada Research Chair Program, Quality of Security Framework for Internet of Things. This is where we're looking at the contextual side of these IoT scenarios, because some of the traditional approaches may not work for them because these devices are small. The networks have constraints, small bandwidth, this and that. A hardware aspect of it where we are simulating that framework in smart home and smart enterprises. To begin with, we have hopes to continue this line of research and do it in the medical settings soon. We're also part of the Canada First Research Excellence Fund through Concordia's CFREV fund, as well as TMU's CFREV fund. One is looking at enabling trustworthy systems for consumer-facing zero trust. So zero trust is an enterprise, topic, an enterprise solution for best practices in cybersecurity. We're trying to redefine or find the requirements for how it should look like in consumer settings. As well as we're working with the University of Calgary under the umbrella of Concordia CFREV for securing smart environments. This is something that just started, and we're very excited to collaborate with our colleagues at the University of Calgary. At TMU, the CFREV program is about migration integration, and we're hoping to bridge the technological divide or gap. And we have two projects or programs of research under that: blockchain-based personal health records, as well as equity, diversity, and inclusion in cybersecurity. One is on the technical side of our research, one is on the social sciences side of our research. I have quite a few more, but I think that gives a general idea of how we're doing. And I hope to continue this conversation with our colleagues. I just want to show you one more picture quickly to acknowledge all the great people at the lab who have been involved in these projects. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Addie. We'll pass it over to Randy.
Sure, and I'll share my slide deck. Okay, let's make sure I'm sharing the right thing. Oh, you're still not seeing. Oh, there we go. Perfect. Okay. Good day, everyone. My name is Randy Purse. I'm the senior advisor for cybersecurity training and education at the Rogers Cybersecurity Catalyst, which is a nonprofit situated within the Toronto Metropolitan University. So our mission, well, I'll give you a bit more background on me. I'm been in cybersecurity for quite some time. I'm a cybersecurity practitioner with a specialization in management, strategy, and training and education. My roots go back into the military, where I was working within. I was a naval officer, and I was doing a lot of different functions as naval officers do. I'd had already activities and roles in physical security, personnel security, communication security, intelligence, a broad range of activities, as you can imagine. And then I got assigned as the information systems security officer within a headquarters, and I was also tasked to be the information operations officer plans. So what was interesting there was it was sort of an indoctrination by fire. There was no training. I ended up doing okay, but like a lot of people in cyber, I survive. And so when I left the military, I joined the Communications Security Establishment, Canadian Center for Cybersecurity, and I was there as a senior learning advisor and subsequently as the strategic advisor for cybersecurity training and education. During that time, that's when I completed my PhD. And my specific PhD was pertaining to team and transformative learning in the IT security incident response team environment. So that was the thesis. And I've also done a lot of work in social learning, identity, and transformative learning as well, all aligned within the technical space, right? So this is my upbringing within education, within the IT space, and in the cyber domain, sort of all meshed together quite well. after that, I went to TechNation as a director of cybersecurity standards and VP future workforce development. And then I said, you know what, I need to get back into focus my attention on cybersecurity. And that's when I joined the Catalyst in 2021. And I've been there ever since, designing, developing, and delivering training and education programs across a broad range of people, of communities within the public and private sector and academia. So I would suggest that we're on a bit of the other side of the scale at the Rogers Cybersecurity Catalyst. I would say we have, and I'm going to talk about the research we conduct, but I'm also going to say that we are a high-end user of the research that's created within Canada and around the world on cybersecurity, because we're primarily involved in the talent development and creating the human capability to address the cybersecurity requirements. So as I said, Rogers Cybersecurity Catalyst is a nonprofit operating at TMU. And we're basically a cybersecurity hub in Canada, and that's our mission right there. We're empowering individuals and organizations to seize opportunities and tackle challenges of cybersecurity with a vision of healthy democracies, thriving societies, and powered by secure digital technologies. And that's a significant challenge, right? And we all can appreciate that. Here's some of the partners we've had, our founding partners, and we have strategic partners in a variety of ways that we to create and deliver programs. And overall, we have four main thrusts within the Catalyst. The first is individual cybersecurity training, and we do a lot of work in this space. We provide initial and enhanced skill development for cybersecurity professionals. We provide training and education for technical and non-technical people through various means, workshops, tabletop exercises, etc. We conduct law enforcement training, working with law enforcement agencies and other institutions on program refinement and enhancement to help with the challenge of cybercrime. And our friend and colleague Ken on the line, we work with him in the National Cybersecurity Consortium as well in that space. We provide training for small, medium businesses, particularly focused on the integration of cybersecurity technologies into their practices. And most small, medium enterprises don't really have the attention necessary, the focused attention on cybersecurity, because they don't measure it as a significant risk. And we're trying to change that a little bit. And then we do also a lot of other educational program development. We also provide corporate security solutions. We provide learning and training for technical teams in the cyber range. We have corporate management and tabletop exercises. We have combined cyber range and tabletop exercises, and we also have we just stood up this year a cyber clinic, which is focusing on providing free consultative services to nonprofits. This is a practice that was initially, there are some cyber clinics in both Europe and the United States, and we sort of modeled ourselves after those. And it's really to give a handout to those who are really struggling in order to achieve some cybersecurity, their cybersecurity requirements. We also have entrepreneurial and startup innovation thrust, where we're really working on trying to get the cybersecurity industry startups on the go and get them to scale up and into the market. And as you may be aware, Canada has a wide range of expertise in cybersecurity, AI, quantum, and really looking forward to having the opportunities to pick up and sustain Canadian businesses. And we also have policy advocacy and awareness. For research, we have the fellowship program, and really this is a broad range of programs within industry where we pair up, we have industry and academic streams, and really a broad range of research coming in there, much of it technical, but much of it human focused. So that's about it for us. We can get into the details as we go through the discussion here, but I really appreciate the opportunity to chat and have a discussion on research in Canada in this session.
Thank you, Randy. That's wonderful. So next we'll pass it over to Pascal Fortin from CyberEco. I'll just get you to unmute yourself.
There you go. Sorry, apologies for coming in a little late. Can I share myself, the slides? Or?
Yes, you can. Yep.
Okay. All right. Give me just a second. So CyberEco is a slightly similar, but also very different organization to the Panelist. So we were born out in Quebec. Similarly, we're an ecosystem organization founded by members, for members, nonprofit. Hold on, I'm having trouble sharing, so just bear with me a little bit. Right. And I'm going to skip to this. So as you can see, there's quite a lot of people involved since 2018. And so it took a lot of time to ramp up. But initially, the idea was, and now is, to truly enable our members to co-develop, share, and ultimately do mutualization of services and capabilities throughout each other. So it's pretty unique intent there. So how do we do that? Well, first, people have to come in with a pretty specific mindset that they are coming to be givers and not just takers. And then they join the membership. We have a series of pre-arranged and negotiated MOUs so that their legal teams can go through it and already agree to how IP is going to be managed, or IP assignment, IP conflict, all these things. So essentially, when you come in as a member and you say, hey, I have this opportunity to build a tool, or I have this opportunity to fix a problem, or I have this issue and I need help, if at least one other member raises their hand, we can then start a project. And a project is something, like any project that is well-defined, has an end date and an outcome, and is going to be managed. And so we provide the rails and the glue, if you will, to make that possible. And because all these MOUs are already cleared with legal, we're able to accomplish things that very few people have accomplished, such as taking two competing financial institutions and two competing insurers in Canada and getting them to co-develop consensus, processes, and technology around insider threat management, for example. That's something that took over 2 years to materialize, but and even was so prolific that it even then spawned a few research chairs at some of our academic members, and is still going on today in the form of continued development and communities of practice that were formed around this initiative. So very, very, very high impact. And some projects maybe also to share with the greater business community or the Canadian community. So if a member says, well, hey, I'd like to publish a guide on a certain topic, then other members can get together and say, yep, we're going to do that. And CyberEco is going to provide some services and support to do that. And those get published and come out. We also assist with a pretty large number of academic projects where we help bring that industry and government angle and validation that is often missing from academic projects, especially, and I know I'm talking to academics mostly, but so there's a reality confrontation that can happen within CyberEco, which has been traumatizing for some and very enlightening for others. That's some of the core of what we do. So, again, going back to the vision, it's to bring the entire Canadian ecosystem. We have members that are national. We have some that are more regional. I have an executive director in Ontario, although, our main facilities are in Quebec for now, but we're leasing space in 4 other provinces right now to make sure that we can have regional teams. What we realize is even when we're working with national members, we end up with representatives that from Quebec, even though they have an Ontario team that would be interested as well, especially in the large corporations. That tends to happen. There's this kind of fragmentation by province, so we're trying to break those silos. Again, truly, to the intent is to co-develop and mutualize. And what do I mean by mutualize? There are things that are done in organizations like cyber threat intelligence. For a bank and for a utilities company, it's not their core business to do cyber threat intelligence. It doesn't matter if they decide to share the output of what they do, or even actively work together as a task force to produce more indicators, to produce more actionable intelligence, and to do deeper, wider threat assessments of what is going on. So that's an initiative we have right now, where we have several institutions that are trying to work out, how can we do this? How can we create this joint task force to do cyber threat intelligence as a group? And some members will do it together. Some might say, no, I'm good, I'm going to do my own thing. Or some might say, hey, I have this third party that's doing it, it's great. It's fine. There's no obligation to opt in. One of the desired outputs is obviously, what can this greater force then do for smaller corporations that can't afford these services? Can we use this initiative also as a force for good and for sharing within the ecosystem? And obviously, with all the intention to make this free and available to as many people as possible. So everything we do is for that greater good. There are some angles that were there in the beginning, about talent development, and I feel that with all the work that we've done with our academic members, we helped validate programs, tooling and labs, a lot of things that industry came in and supported our academia in building their programs, not just the regular ones, but like the post university training, like what they call the executive education and non-credited programs. And I feel that our universities and colleges are there. So we don't feel that this is a role that we need to really push. We're there to understand government and academia, know what is needed and what quantity, and provide feedback as necessary. But this is not something we want to take on really ourselves. And we advise our members as well. So whether it's government, federal, provincial, or others, when they have specific issues, so we're able to go back to the members, get consensus on the topic or an answer. So that's a pretty useful capability as well. And I try to help save as much public funds as possible through being involved in government program reviews, all those nice funding programs where oftentimes there's not a lot of validation of the actual value or ROI. So we help those organizations understand what has merit and not. So that's pretty useful. I hope in the big picture to save money for all our taxpayers, including myself. Lots of projects going on now. I'm not going to go over all of this, but I think by now you guys understand what kind of organization we are and what we do. So we have projects and communities of practice. Communities of practice continue the effort that goes beyond a project, or can be beforehand of a project. this isn't the up-to-date slide, but essentially we have several events, like several times a week, there's something happening within CyberEco. We also have become the home of all the other nonprofits. If you're a nonprofit, like an OWASP chapter, we will support you. We give space, we give food, we help them. We help the professionals that want to be involved in our industry, not look for money to get it done, because it's such a waste of time for those professionals. So we take away a lot of that pain. We have the Cyber Hub as well. So since 2024, really, we've been invested in supporting startups and scale-ups in cyber. This is very, very high level, high quality stuff. So a lot of exited founders, so some things in common with Catalyst on that front. The different as well. Like, I won't go into all the details, but that's something where we have 42 startups and scale-ups everywhere from ideation to Series B, funded $80 to $100 million value startups that we're helping grow, export, and better develop their technologies. And that was it for me. So I am Pascal Fortin, CEO of CyberEco, entrepreneur in cybersecurity. I used to own GoSecure. I co-founded a bunch of others, sold Delve Labs also in 2020. I'm in a lot of things, so a lot of you may already have heard about me. So that's it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Pascal. And with that, we'll turn it over to David Murakami Wood from the University of Ottawa.
Hi, good morning, good evening, and good night, everybody, wherever you are in the world, probably mostly in Canada. I'm coming from a slightly different background than most of the other panelists here. I'm very much almost a pure academic in the sense I'm not doing applied cybersecurity research for any external partners or trying to improve government cybersecurity or private sector cybersecurity. In fact, in many ways, I'm not a cybersecurity researcher at all. But as the saying goes, I don't know much about cybersecurity, but I know what I like. What I'm actually doing and what I actually am is the Canada Research Chair in Critical Surveillance and Security Studies at the University of Ottawa. And I'm going to share my screen a bit so I can just show you some of this as I go through. I'll show mine here. And this is just going to share a Safari link. You can see that. And this is the link to my lab, which is the Critical Surveillance and Security Lab at the University of Ottawa. What we're really interested in primarily, as it says at the beginning, is questioning, critiquing, examining the ubiquity of surveillance technologies, but also practices and processes at all scales. So we work from everything from things like neuroscience right up to planetary level things. So our primary project is on urban surveillance, platform cities in an age of planetary surveillance. We're looking at post-smart cities, i.e. what's happening after smart cities and the proliferation of different kinds of AI cities, platform cities, smart cities, whatever you want to call them. Also very interested in the whole question of planetary security in an age of multiple crises, or the poly crisis, as some people call this. And so obviously cybersecurity is a very essential component of this. And people have talked about the idea of planetary computing and this sort of thing. And that's where we're thinking about things there. Interested in particularly in artificial intelligence, data and data valence. And the project, which is currently funded through the Human-Centric Cybersecurity Partnership, which is called Hired Hackers and Private Spies, and is basically looking at a global assessment of the landscape of private surveillance companies in the world. And I'll talk maybe a little bit about this in some of the other sessions we have, but I'll briefly introduce that here now. Many of you may know there is a process going on right now, the Pall Mall process, started by Britain and France, which is trying to establish a code of practice for cyber capabilities, which essentially is focused a lot on the private spyware industry. We're looking a bit wider than that, but what we're trying to do is research that feeds into this process, and we're working with a number of external NGO partners here. As we'll talk about maybe in some of the other sessions, this has been, this NGO landscape has been significantly hit by the recent change in government in the USA, and particularly the cessation of funding to many organizations that previously funded this kind of cybersecurity for democracy type of work. And we'll talk a bit about that later on, because this is a vitally important thing to discuss. when we're talking about the future of cybersecurity research, I think. In fact, Canada may have an extremely important role to play in filling some of that gap that is currently being left by the USA. So we can talk about that later. So what do I do other than this? I have a team in the lab, and this is basically various people, visiting researchers, internal postdocs and PhD candidates. We have a number of different people. We have Trudeau Foundation fellows. We have people working on, particularly at the moment, on the understanding of smart technologies and security in China, Chinese language specialists, which is a big project we have right now. And we also have some major workshops coming up looking at private smart city initiatives and that kind of thing. I'm also the founder and still a co-editor-in-chief of the Open Access journal. We're one of the first ever open access journals. We've been going since 2002, called Surveillance in Society, and I encourage you to take a look. It's free. You can read any of the articles with no cost. You can submit with no cost. You publish with no cost. We are what they call a diamond standard open access journal, and I really encourage people thinking about doing this kind of stuff now to contact me if you're interested in publishing this way or starting your own journal. The current issue revisits issues of authoritarian surveillance, and particularly has an editorial on surveillance in Trump's America and a whole special section on authoritarianism, surveillance, and the digital. I'm also a trustee and director of the Surveillance Studies Network, which again is an association of scholars which looks critically at surveillance throughout the world. And again, you can join that for a relatively low price and be involved in all of our stuff. We have a biennial conference next year, which will be in Lille in France over 4 days in the second week of June. And we have many other workshops and events. In a few weeks' time, a few of us are meeting in Ottawa to talk about AI and surveillance. And just recently, there's been our first event in Africa associated with the Digital Rights and Inclusion Forum, where we've been bringing African surveillance scholars together. This is through our initiative Surveillance in the Majority World, run by Professor Azadeh Akbari. So we have a number of different initiatives going on, and this is mainly what I do. How much time do I have, Michael? Just maybe a minute?
Yeah, maybe a minute.
Yeah, I don't need much more. Just to say that's what I do. That's who I am. Particularly of interest of this group is the Hired Hackers and Private Spies project, and that's probably what I intend to address in some of the future sessions. So I'll leave it there. I'm not going to give any lists of funders or connections, although we do have some.
Wonderful. So thank you very much, David. And with that, we'll pass it over to Mark Elliot from the University of Manchester and SPRITE Plus, who's here to make sure that we don't have a case of Canadian groupthink and provide an outside perspective.
Yes, I don't know. I don't know that I'm necessarily going to add that much diversity into the equation, but I will do my best. Okay, so just sharing my own slides. Okay, share. No, that's not what I meant to do. Oh, I don't know. Have I come on screen? Slides. Hello, my slides on screen. Okay, thank you. Yes, SPRITE. So I'm really representing SPRITE here. Security, Privacy, Identity, and Trust Network Plus. So we are a engagement network, cross-sector, cross-disciplines, and across segments of this broader area. So somewhat broader, perhaps, than the cybersecurity specific focus up to now, although I recognise that in many cases it includes some of these other concepts as well. We're a network, and the plus bit is we're also a research incubator. So we have a structure of membership, which is free and open. We have 1,000 members. Members can apply to be expert fellows. We have 230 of those, and then numerous project partners. These are the 5 universities that run SPRITE. So Manchester, Lancaster, Imperial College London, University of Southampton, Queen's University Belfast, all the UK, obviously. And then we have numerous, this is not a full list, but some of the partners that we currently have, so people that we work with in various ways and forms. So taking the brief, what are we focusing on at the moment? So these are our current strategic foci. Then we did a big strategic review at the beginning of 24, and this is what we came up with as being the things we're focusing on. So the topics that have come out of numerous consultations and discussions, deliberation fora, etc., that we've run in 23 and 24, including a future summer camp in the middle of 23. So living in an authentic world, thinking about inauthenticity in all its shapes and forms, both positive and negative, what that means in terms of how we think about various important topics, specifically around identity. Tips in digital cities, also called smart cities, various other terminology. What does that mean in terms of our key topics: trust, identity, privacy, security? Concept of trustworthy digital identity, how's it developing, what are its meanings, what are its cultural contexts, how does it relate to non-digital identity? Just emerged resilience, so we've got a theme developing out of cyber resilience. We're running a sandpit on that next month. Extended reality and its intersections with other technologies, and then neurotechnology. So those are the strategic themes that we're focusing on within our broader remit. So here's some of the things we're currently doing. So this is the current year. So we've got 4 deep dive projects all starting this year. So these are 1 year intensive projects with a researcher working full time. And they're always combined with other people. So trustworthy digital identity with the Alan Turing Institute. We've got 2 new ones here down the bottom, the extended reality one, neurotech one. They have yet to kick off. That will be happening in the next few months. We're running a sandpit. So this is our incubator function. So we actually have funding to give out. So we do fund projects run by our expert fellows. And we're doing this in combination with another investment within the UKRI ecosystem called Salient, which focuses on resilience. So this is an intersection of trust, identity, privacy, security, and cyber resilience. And then we have this mechanism called Innovation Forum, which is really designed as an engagement mechanism to bring together cross sectors. In this case, the policing services within the UK and academics working on policing, looking at the use of AI in preventive policing. So that's with a big consortia of northern police forces in the UK. We're going to have various other innovation for quite a lot of AI sprinkling through here. We haven't got AI as a particular theme because obviously it connects with just about everything, as I'm sure everyone else has recognised in their own workings too. And then we have this is the 5th deep dive. We've actually got this under impacts and advancing policy because very much hooked in with government, in this case local government, Greater Manchester Combined Authority. So tips in digital cities, connected places, thinking about all of those elements of providing and ensuring trust, identity, privacy, security within the context of that sort of smart city ecosystem. We have a mechanism called challenge projects. So this comes the other way. So project partners will produce a challenge. So some sort of problem statement. This gets converted in a call to our expert fellows, who then are one of whom is then commissioned to deliver that project. And we have numerous collaborative policy workshops and deliberative fora, more aimed at our government partners than our industry ones. Yeah, there's just some large meetings we had. I'll put the expert fellows meeting on. This was just this week. We have an annual meeting of our expert fellows, and we have a topic that we kind of go, right, let's talk about this for 2 days. It was AI this year, which must be about as predictable as anything. We did have a moratorium on talking about AI for the last 18 months, simply because it was impossible to make yourself heard above the din. And we thought, well, it's got quiet enough now, it might actually be worth talking about this, and I can see how things have settled down a bit. And so that was quite fun. And then we have an annual showcase, which is aimed at business engagement. Then we have international engagement schemes as well. So we're arranging international collaborative visits with IF Cyber, which is University of New South Wales. I've mooted this as a possible interaction with H2CP as well, as another mechanism for us to engage. We do also have an engagement with some of our junior expert fellows with the H2CP summer camp, and Global Voices, which is an engagement with partners in the global South, Africa in particular. And then we've got various mechanisms for explicitly engaging the partners. We fund placements within project partners by academics, and also PhD student placements as well. Then we do that by an AIM day mechanism, so academic industry meeting days. And that one again happened last month, and those placements will be starting out for this year. We're starting in the next few months. And we have an expert clinic service we're about to start, and that is essentially a mechanism for people to engage and identify expertise that they need to consult within their organisations. So it's a triaging service, and we fund an initial meeting between an expert and an external partner who needs some input. So that is very quickly a whistle-stop tour of what SPRITE is about.
Very good. Thank you, Mark. And with that, we will pass it over to Ken Barker from the National Cybersecurity Consortium.
Give me a second here. I'm just trying to get the share screen working properly. Share.
Thank you, Ken. I feel better now.
So I'm just trying to see what's being shared. Is the...
Your entire screen.
Yeah, okay, that's not what I want. For some strange reason, I'm picking the single screen and it's grabbing everything. That might work. Let's try that. That looks better.
That is perfect.
Okay, good. So let me start by a very brief introduction of myself. So I started working in cybersecurity before it was a thing. In the very early 80s, and I did a master's degree in 82 on something called local area network security. And the first two questions I was asked during my master's thesis defense was, what's a local area network and why in the world would anybody want to secure it? So I've got to say that I've kind of been at this almost from the beginning, for lack of a better way of putting it. And I am now 40 years further out. I went through 25 years of working largely in data systems and got interested in privacy type related questions in the early 2000s. And I've kind of been working on that kind of an area ever since. So I've sort of got a solid, depending upon how you look at it, 40 or at least a good 20 years of working in cybersecurity related issues with now primarily a focus on privacy. So that's my academic background. Just to give you a bit of context about some of the other things that I've done. I've been a department head at 2 different universities. I've been a dean at my current university. And so I was kind of at the end of my deanship and thinking about what I wanted to do for a next step. And one of the things that came to mind was what eventually became the National Cybersecurity Consortium. I'm going to describe to you a little bit about what this thing is and provide a little bit of a history, because I think it's informative about how difficult, challenging, and potentially beneficial putting together national level initiatives are to actually catalyzing work and effort within a targeted or focused area. So I understand there's some international people on. They may not be familiar with the concepts that we have around here of doing what's called curiosity-driven research. Not so much in the SHRC area, but certainly in the CIHR or the medical area and in the science and engineering areas. These are basically, you apply for grants, you get a small amount of money, and out of that small amount of money, you actually do very early stage research, fundamental kinds of research that have actually been catalytic to Canada's punching way above its weight in the country, because it truly is curiosity driven by experts. So even though you might apply for X, you can actually work in Y. And when you come back and want something to work in Z, some other kind of topic, you report on what you did, not on what you promised you would do. That's an inherently different thing than what the National Cybersecurity Consortium is doing, because although that addressed and provides a fundamental way that we work in this country, it doesn't actually facilitate very well moving things out of the lab and into the marketplace. We do actually have, through angel investment and a number of other kinds of things in the country, a number of potential receptors for ideas. And you'll see I'm going to talk about the real challenge is, how do you get from the early ideas all the way out to the ideas that are actually coming out as innovations in the marketplace. So the tagline I've put on this little talk is bridging post-secondaries, government and the private sector together. And I've got to say this up front, all three of these groups have their own unique vocabulary. And so we often talk past each other. The problem is that they're actually using the same words, but they have a very different semantic. Here's my favorite example, innovation. If I say innovation to somebody who is a cutting edge researcher in a university lab, they think it's something that's in a grad student's head that's innovating on sort of the backs of giants. If I say innovation to somebody in the private sector, they're talking about moving a new product out into the market. If those two people are having a conversation and they agree that there should be more innovation support in the country, they're talking about two totally different things. And so part of the role that the National Cybersecurity Consortium has taken on is actually trying to get those conversations to actually be a meeting of the minds. So I'm going to quickly walk through kind of our history and where we're at right now, and give you a sense for what we're doing in the country at the national level. And all of our work, you'll see, is around cybersecurity and privacy. This is a little bit different than what we often do in this country, which is kind of try to be all things to all people. And so as a result, you kind of don't really support anybody particularly well. This is specifically targeted at cybersecurity and privacy, and I will tell you that it's fairly inclusive within that fairly narrow umbrella, and you'll see what I mean here in just a sec. So everybody has to have a vision and a mission statement. It's the only way you can set up an organization. We're technically a federally incorporated not-for-profit, which means we have to have a board, we have to have a membership structure, we have to have oversight. There's a ton of different things that go around. Part of it is these kinds of things. Advancing cybersecurity, innovation, and talent development in Canada is kind of our vision, and the mission is to grow a pan-Canadian network that works with private and public sectors to lead world-class cybersecurity innovation and talent development, and to increase cybersecurity-related economic development in Canada. We're actually funded by ICED, which is Innovation, Science, and Economic Development. And by the way, ICED views innovation with that second definition, not with the first definition, unless you're talking to Tri-Council, in which they use innovation to mean that first definition. So there's definitely a bifurcation of even the definition of the ministry that actually operates or has oversight on a big piece of our activities. So the NCC itself is a pan-Canadian network. It supports advancement of the Canadian cybersecurity ecosystem through research and development, commercialization, and training. And the idea here is we're going to drive collaboration among academia, private sector, not-for-profit organizations, provincial, territorial, and municipal governments, and other key cybersecurity stakeholders. You'll notice the absent one from that governmental bullet point is federal government, because the federal government is in it through what's called the CSIN program. And so they're already fundamental in it. And you'll see that this has implications potentially for how things can be funded and how matching money can be counted. So here's really you've probably seen this before. In Canada, we have a number of tech readiness levels that we've identified. There's actually 9 of them. The first 3 are essentially in academia. They're very fundamental ideas, starting with something that might be in a grad student's head. And then at the other end, 7, 8, 9, we're actually moving product out to market. When you're moving product out to market, you're kind of in this commercialization phase and the vocabulary changes significantly. There is some support out there because, quite bluntly, private sector companies start to see the potential value of near-term value of making investments in ideas that are reasonably mature. We refer to them as alpha or beta products, already kind of exist. The problem in our country is that we've identified is this gap called the Valley of Death. It's a well-known problem. It's this 4, 5, and 6. It's moving it from the academic community where there is some funding, reasonable kinds of levels of funding, through the place where there's no funding available, essentially the Valley of Death, into the point at which industry starts to pick up the funding, and then the funding just scales kind of almost exponentially as the idea becomes stronger and more viable. So that's kind of the whole ecosystem, and the NCC was charged with actually supporting the entire ecosystem. So to give you a bit of a sense for how this thing got started, 4 scholars who actually saw a need for this had a discussion in 2016. Keep that in mind, this is 2016. So it became 5 by the time the funding was available. And so there was 5 scholars that started it and then got their universities on side. Notice private sector were not involved at this particular point, though there were conversations going on lightly with some private sector companies. A shared vision gets created to have an impact on scholarship and innovation in Canada to better protect Canada and Canadians. There was a substantial lobbying effort, and I'm using that term very guardedly. You're not allowed to lobby the government unless you're a registered lobbyist. And we were academics, so we weren't lobbying. The technical word was we were educating, but it's kind of a distinction without a difference. But it was a substantial lobbying effort that was put into getting commitments from the federal government to provide direct support to cyber issues, both security and privacy. In 2019, so 3 years it took to get a budget announcement of a commitment of $80 million from the federal government. So they put $80 million into the budget as a line item, and they said that in 2021, they would launch the what eventually became known as the CSIN program. So from conception to funding, to potentially funding being available, was a 5-year gap. There's a long story. Offer me a beer later and I'll go give you all the details you would ever want. It actually took 2 years for that competition call to come out. Just like in the Army, this was hurry up and wait. We had 5 weeks to submit an application. This application was hundreds of pages long, and it required at least a 1-to-1 matching dollars from industry. So we had 5 weeks to raise $80 million of commitments in order to get this thing to move forward. We managed to get it done, okay? We submitted it, 5 weeks to write the application, okay? And then waited 8 months to find out if we were actually successful with the application. And yay, we won. The federal government gave us $80 million, and as part of that application, we didn't raise just $80 million of commitment, we raised $163 million in commitment. So the total package of funding going into just cybersecurity and privacy research in the country is a total of about $243 million worth of commitments. Now we're tracking slightly under that right now because the leverage is not quite at the 2-to-1 ratio, but it's very close to that. So the problem is we now had 5 academics who had to set this thing up. And by the way, we were doing this off the side of our desk. We had several false starts as we tried to get it going. So where are we now? We did get it going, by the way. Obviously, you invited me to talk about this. There's 132 post-secondaries in the country who have raised their hands and are participating in some aspect of the NCC's activities. We also have 84 private sector participants that are participating in some aspect of those activities. The private sector includes large organizations, small organizations, and not-for-profits. So we were able to hit our goal of getting the whole country at all the different levels and sectors involved. Most projects involved at least one post-secondary educational institution and one private sector. And we really look for meaningful collaboration. So we don't want somebody to say, yeah, okay, I'm interested in the project, and when it gets to TRL 8, we'll start to invest. We want the private sector to participate at the early stage ones, and then we want the post-secondary researchers to continue to be involved as it moves into the later TRL levels. So we're really after meaningful collaborations. So the problem is that we've been raised as academics for all intents and purposes to kind of be competitive with one another, and we're trying to break that model. So we're trying to encourage things to not just come from a single lab. And one of the key evaluation metrics, though it's not a requirement, it is strongly encouraged that the labs across the country find collaborations and work together to ask for larger chunks of money. And you'll see in a later slide that we're actually getting people to put proposals in for chunks of money that are atypical of what they usually are capable of applying for. We actually do this across a number of different streams. This was last year's award, but I'm just using it as an example. We do work in critical infrastructure. We've got 5 focus areas. One is critical infrastructure. Another is human-centric cybersecurity, which is where much of what this conversation today is going to fall within. Privacy protection, network security, and software security. So although 4 of those look very technical, I can tell you that every one of those 4 have got some aspect of HCC, human-centric cybersecurity, as a part of them, or we've got projects that are supporting how do you better do build human factors into the development of cybersecurity systems. The breakout of the project by stream, which is the training, commercialization, and R&D streams, are there on the right side of the slide. Last year, we shipped $22.8 million to 37 projects. The year before, we shipped just shy of $12 million to 19 projects. This year, I'm not sure what we're going to get because the deadline for the applications this year is actually today. There's 3 categories of funding that people can apply to the NCC for. Something called accelerated projects, and there's a whole bunch of detail here. I've left this, I've just left all of this on this fairly busy slide because I'm gonna make the slide deck available to anybody who wants it. So there's accelerated projects. These are really intense, high cost, high intense, short-term kinds of projects, have to be completed in 2 years. New projects, the onboarding of the projects that you just saw from the 5 different focus areas that we're encouraging. And we opened up a second new category this year because what we were getting was comments coming back from some of our existing projects that were saying, oh, we've had a way that we want to innovate what we've been doing, so can you give us a little bit more money? We can't do that without going through some kind of a competition, so we got agreement from the government to open up this category called top-ups, and they're available to the 23 and 24 call projects. Once again, research and development projects, generally TRL 1 through 6. Commercialization projects are 7 through 9. Very hard to get good commercialization projects because they're generally written by private sector companies that are trying to get themselves going. And they're not like academics, which are very good at writing grant applications. So we have to do quite a bit of mentoring with the commercialization projects in order to get high enough quality ones that we actually feel comfortable funding them. And then the training projects are actually come in a number of different things, and it's across the entire ecosystem from traditional undergraduate, graduate, PhD degrees through to upskilling, reskilling, and looking at things like taking it out to First Nations and EDI and other kinds of activities like that to diversify the cybersecurity ecosystem.
Ken, I'll just get you to bring it to a close?
One slide. The standard projects that we've got are basically large scale ones, and spearhead ones are directly aimed at TRL1 and don't require matching money. And with that, you can see here the amount of funds that are available, up to $2.5 million. And with that, I am going to pause.
Wonderful. Well done. Well done. You brought it in right at the end there. It's very difficult to explain so much in such a short amount of time. Really, really difficult challenge. So let's get into the questions. And the first question that I wanted to bring to the panel is, what areas of cybersecurity research are we overlooking right now? And I might ask, just to kick us off while we're organizing who would like to respond to this question, I might direct it to Atty, because we haven't heard from you for a while, and I assume everybody's going to have a very different opinion on this one. But what are the areas of cybersecurity research that we are overlooking right now?
Thank you for the question. Cybersecurity, generally speaking, is always underfunded if you ask the Chief Information Security Officers. And I think that translates to the feeling of cybersecurity researchers. There's not enough money to go around for cybersecurity research in general. But I'd like to focus on human-centered cybersecurity, more specifically two areas that I think are close to what I do. There has been some research around governance and security of decentralized ecosystems, but definitely not enough with a human-centered approach. I'll say a little bit more about it, but the second one is human-centric cybersecurity for marginalized populations. I'll say a little bit more about that as well in a moment. So right now, going back to the first one, so security and governance of decentralized ecosystems. Right now, most research in this area is focused on smart contracts, bugs in cryptographic flaws that is inherited, really the technical side of it, which is important. But that's only part of the picture. The real challenge is often how in these decentralized ecosystems, people who are sitting behind these nodes in a decentralized way are going to react. And human nature gets involved, and we don't have enough multidisciplinary teams who are working to understand how these two can work together, in my opinion. So the people who are making the decisions and how the power is distributed and how those processes can be manipulated. So I think there's a lot that can be done. There's a lot that still needs to be discovered there, and there's a big opportunity that not enough people are looking at. And what's tricky here is that the vulnerabilities are not purely technical, they're social and behavioral too, and we don't have many frameworks, effective frameworks to study the intersection. Okay, I think we need political theory, behavioral economics, sociology to work hand in hand and in equal, eye-to-eye terms with people who know that, scholars who know the technology side of this, to move that forward. The second topic that I mentioned, human-centric cybersecurity in general, I think there's a lot to be done, because humans are unfortunately often called the weakest link in the chain, or if not that, the soft part of cybersecurity, quotation, as if that's a bad thing. But more specifically, human-centered cybersecurity for marginalized population. I think it's definitely underexplored, and there's a big gap that we have there. And what do I mean by that? Most tool solutions are designed with a kind of an average user in mind. Sometimes marginalized populations are referred to as edge cases. Again, that negative connotation there. So they don't reflect the reality for many people who are really at risk. For example, people like journalists and activists. There's the cybersecurity implications for the type of activity that they do in their professional work and real life day-to-day is very different. Okay, refugees. Other minorities who are living in hostile environments, they face very different threats. They're dealing with targeted surveillance, harassment, phishing, targeted phishing, sometimes even from their own people who they trust, whether in their communities or the government through proxies. And these users often don't have access to the latest, greatest tools. So we need to make sure that tools that we're developing, suggesting, are usable, accessible, and relevant to their unique context. Okay, and that's very important. So I think the academic world has this ethical responsibility to play this role to make sure not just the research in terms of publication, but also push it out so there's actually products going out, making it available, accessible to these users as well. With that, I stop, and I'd like to hear others as well.
So I might hand that question over to Randy next to see if he has a comment.
Sure. I want to bounce off what Addie was just talking about with respect to, in particular, immigrants and those types of people. And we're just working on a project related to that right now. And I think some of the issues around their perceptions of cybersecurity in the transition from the places they're coming from into Canada, I don't think we understand that well. I think that there's some challenges there, and particularly going from a place where they have a significant amount of insecurity and moving into a place where there's moderately more security in general, like around their person, around their personhood, you know, their ability to express identity. Those types of things mean something to them, and how does that context matter to them, and what are the things that they're going to need in order to be particularly effective when they're coming into the country in order to avoid something else, or to become part of the Canadian society or any other nation's society. And how are we supporting them in order to be able to make sure that they could adopt technologies that are frequently used within Canada? So that's one thing. I really like that thing. The other thing we don't really do a lot of, and we impose a lot of understandings, and I know this is a sensitive subject, but we impose a lot of understandings, our adult understandings, onto children. And I don't think we do enough research, and it's hard. I know it's a hard research area, but enough research about child adoption of technologies and their understanding and perceptions of risk. Right? We make a bunch of assumptions around child use of technologies, and we have a discussion across Canada right now about the banning of cell phones in schools. Okay, well, what is that? That's symptomatic to me of a broader, and this is Randy's opinion here, okay, a broader education system that actually hasn't really figured out how to adopt technologies in an effective way and allow for internal use of cell phones within the classroom. And there's a broader societal thing in there which matters, right? And I understand that, but just thinking about cybersecurity for youth is a really important topic. A couple other pet peeves: policing in the digital world. What does that mean? We still have a very old model of law enforcement and how they are both recruited, integrated into the police forces, and then, you know, they'll spend 5 years in a car doing normal policing activities. They may get assigned to a cybercrime unit. Then they're in the cybercrime unit for a little while, and then they're off somewhere else, right? So what kind of models can we adopt that actually, you know, sort of leave behind some of the traditional models of policing in the digital world, and really emphasize, you know, what are the things that they need to be doing in order to be able to stop cybercrime? Because otherwise the expertise just gets transferred on to other domains of work, which is fine. But I don't think there's enough research in that space, to be honest with you, to understand what that means, what the transition between work is, and et cetera. And then finally, the utility of compliance mechanisms in addressing cyber risk. We talk about compliance, we talk about cyber risk, and we know they're interlaced, but I don't think we've actually done any real, at the organizational level, we don't really understand the utility of compliance in addressing cyber risk. Those are the ones that come to mind right off the top of my head.
Okay, great. I will call on Mark to see if Mark, do you have any comments on the question as to which areas of cybersecurity research we're overlooking right now?
I'm curious as to who we is in this context, so who we are, because of course it's kind of just like interesting questions about different perspectives, which I think is really important in understanding how cybersecurity is perceived, or even if it is perceived in different cultural contexts. I mentioned our expert fellows meeting. We had a really good keynote talk by a young scholar called Kanti Dehal, who works on how AI is perceived in different cultures, and it's very illuminating, that discussion. Interestingly, the sort of historical perspective she gave on that also kind of chimes with work that we've done here on public perception of AI, and how that's being pulled out in various cultural contexts. So AI and cyber are kind of going down, feel like they're going down similar paths in respect to this, in terms of, you know, how the research is done and how it's focused. So I'm just kind of emphasizing that element of thinking about cybersecurity and how it's mediated through cultural lenses. The other thing I think, which is a much more kind of in my wheelhouse, is thinking about it from a more of a futures orientation. So a lot of research in socio-technical areas tends to focus on what's happening in front of our noses. So of course, there's been an enormous amount done in the last couple of years on AI and cybersecurity, just because that was kicking off left, right, and centre in the public domain. And actually, I think we should spend more of our time looking ahead, because what happens with the kind of reactive approach, which often encapsulates a lot of the research in this area, is that we're trying to fix something that has appeared and is already kind of causing issues in the world. So I would kind of be looking like, well, what's going to be happening in 10 years' time, given all the current social and technological changes that we're seeing, and then focusing more on that. That's one of the reasons why we picked out neurotech. Obviously, that's not a completely absent technology, but it's not kind of in the mainstream at the moment. But current trajectory strongly suggests neurological augmentation is a likely thing to be happening in 10 years' time. Cybersecurity issues around that are going to be massive, and very different. And so actually, people doing thinking about that, and possibly this is where human-orientated cybersecurity really comes home, because it's about physical cyber stuff being physically connected to actual soft, to use Atefeh's words, human beings. And so we think that this is a kind of really kind of critical area. That's just one technology. I'm not necessarily touting for that, but I think actually just orientating ourselves broader in terms of the perspectives that we're drawing in, and further forward in terms of what we're focusing on as the key areas, I think will be really important.
Very interesting. And I think we'll go to David just to round us out on this question.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, I'd really like to echo some of what's been said before. Mark's comments are very pertinent. I mean, there's a handful of people working on neurosurveillance and neuroprivacy. One of the most prominent being Marcelo Ianca, who's doing an amazing job, but there are not that many people. I recently did a small project looking at the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency's projects in this area, and there's a whole load. There's a massive emphasis on neuro technologies and neurosurveillance. And those are just the things we know about. As you know, if you've looked at DARPA's archives, things are there publicly for a while, then they go dark, and you don't know whether they've been implemented or whether they've failed. And so we have to have I think it needs to be a real focus on that sort of thing, that interface between the cyber and the biological, essentially. It's not just neurological, but broader things. Yeah. I'd also like to echo what Ati said earlier on about, sort of global justice and people, people from different countries. I think justice is a key component here. Cybersecurity has a tendency, like other topics, broadly speaking, connected with policing, to be considered to be like the same everywhere, as if cybersecurity is cybersecurity wherever you're talking about it. And it's really not the case. And it's not just, for example, as Randy said, with new immigrants to Canada being an issue for us, but the way in which people are now followed throughout their life course, wherever they go, by the the intelligence agencies, the people who track them in the beginning in their home country. And anybody from Iran or Russia will know this personal attention, for example, continues to be focused on you, regardless of how long ago it is that you left the country, especially if you left the country, for security reasons, like for your own personal security. That kind of long hand of digital interference and cyber sort of intrusion is really, really key. And the final thing I just wanted to say is, leading on to this, is the question of geopolitics. I think one of the things we have to address in cybersecurity research is the fox and the hen house problem. Many of us assume that the countries we're working for are good people, basically. We're good people doing good things for good reasons. But you only have to look at who the people are involved in private surveillance companies in the world. And you start to see names, countries like Italy, like Switzerland, like Israel, like others, who are nominally allies of Canada, but they're all major sponsors of these kinds of private surveillance companies. And some of the times, of course, we think it's okay for us if we use these mercenary companies for good reasons, but it's not okay for someone else. But these are very much part of the same phenomenon. I think the Pall Mall process is really important because it's for the first time kind of addressing this as a, if you like, geopolitically neutral conception. We're actually going to try to address the damage that our private surveillance companies do, not just the damage that their private surveillance companies do. And I think that's a really key thing. We've got to be a lot more honest about our own governments and corporations' involvement in these kind of things and funding of these kinds of things. So that's an area I'd like to see a lot more work done on. Obviously, it's part of what I'm doing. So of course, I want to see more research in that area. But thank you very much.
Wonderful. And this is such an interesting question, I guess, and a fundamental question that we might take a little bit more time on it. So I'm going to pass it over to Pascal.
You're muted, Pascal.
Sorry. Very interesting to hear everyone's comments and interests. Some very, very sophisticated stuff. I'll bring it back a couple levels in terms of complexity, but in the human aspect of it, obviously from CyberEco's perspective, we don't feel there's a lot of research out there on mutualization of cybersecurity capabilities, of how to be, how organizations can share tools, knowledge, expertise across sectors, how they can operate under different mandates and still collaborate, the sharing of IP and capabilities. It's not like we have any actual statistics or measures of performance or anything to support any of what we're trying to do in this space. So clearly there's a lack of research there. And in fact, there are a lot of cautionary tales that I've personally observed, but that could lead to some interesting assumptions. So if you're a professor wanting to study this, I'm happy to potentially work with you on that. I think another very interesting portion, and I started bringing economists into cyber around the mid-2000s, 2005, 2006. And that yielded some pretty interesting results. And we focused on the behavior of malware groups and actors at the time, and came up with some of the original publications in that space. And now I would like to take those people from the economics and finance side and bring them more into the cost optimization and rationalization of cybersecurity capabilities. And there are hundreds of millions, if not billions, something to test and verify that is being wasted because we are overspending on capabilities that do not provide the return on risk reduction that is necessary or expected. And that is a huge problem. The way that we attribute funds to capabilities, attribute staffing, humans and technical capabilities, that's something that hasn't really been studied. And that's also a complex one, because if you're an academic, you will need to work with industry in depth to be able to get to that. And you will need a multidisciplinary, cross-section of people to be able to do that. Now, I've come up with a full series of services and capabilities during my tenure at KPMG around this, but it wasn't based on any actual academic work. It was based on my personal experience and what I could observe and what I could bring in terms of tools and solutions. But I couldn't go and look at any academic papers or studies or tools to build up a practice and a professional capability. This all had to be done industry level. So that I see a huge weakness there that, you know, materializes in the form of we're not covering enough of the risk because we're covering the wrong risk because we're, you know, putting the money in the wrong places ultimately. So that's my 2 cents on this. Sorry. That took a little more time than I thought.
Well, I mean, it's such an interesting area, and my apologies to Ken, but what I might do is move on to the next question for 2 reasons. One, we're trying to get through quite a lot of very interesting areas, and the second reason is you're taking applications today, and I wouldn't want the answer to that question to induce unnecessary stress in the people who are completing their applications at the moment if you suddenly say some area that they hadn't thought of and they want to rewrite things. So if you don't mind, Ken, what I might put to you first is, how do we make sure that the human element doesn't get sidelined in cybersecurity research? It's often one of those things that's hard to quantify in terms of return on investment, and it's not necessarily one of the things that screams profitable product when you start talking about humans and societies and larger, broader sort of public factors. So how do you think we can probably work towards making sure the human element doesn't get sidelined when it comes to cybersecurity research?
So I actually, it's interesting the way the question's kind of articulated, because the return on investment potentially from understanding human factors and the human element in cybersecurity and privacy related questions is probably the largest return on investment that we can make. And I say that because I can make an investment in somebody who creates the next great cryptographic algorithm, okay? And the return on that investment may occur over 50 years, and it would be incremental at best, to be honest with you, possibly essential. And we would actually never be able to quantify that as a return on investment. But if you make an investment in your people to get them up to speed on how to better protect themselves, their organization, and actually, as far as that goes, their personal life writ large, that ROI is significant and immediate. I think what we have to do is start asking the question differently. And the question isn't, well, what's the direct ROI? In other words, I put $1 in, I get $5 out. Instead, we have to say, well, what are the costs of not putting $1 in? Okay, and think about a privacy breach as an example of that. Failing to get people to, for example, have as a default an encryption of their laptop when they're traveling, an encrypted disk as their laptop, so they end up revealing private and personal information from their client base. The cost to the organization could be huge. I mean, absolutely huge because of the privacy breach. GDPR has, up to 4% of your annual revenue as a potential penalty that you might have to pay for something like that. And that catalyzed a different kind of behavior. And those breaches usually don't occur because some really clever 16-year-old manages to hack into your laptop. They occur because you leave the laptop at the bar and go for a walk to get to your airplane at the last minute. And how do you train people to get to the point at which those are the kinds of factors that are that you're going to consider? So what I would encourage researchers to do is start thinking about return on investment if you're in the social sciences, if you're in economics, if you're in other things, in a different way than engineers and scientists think about how to make an argument to a corporation to get investment into their ideas. And that's about protection, and it's about getting your people trained, and it's a whole bunch of other things. How do we build better systems that have, for example, privacy by design as a core part of their design process? Believe me, your typical programmer is not thinking about privacy by design because they haven't been trained in it, because they haven't considered human factors and all those other kinds of aspects. So I'll pause there. I could probably go on for hours, but I'll pause there.
So I'll put it over to Ati to get her insights on this.
Thank you. I totally agree with everything that Ken said, particularly that the ROI is really huge when you invest in the people. I'd like to qualify, though, while the ROI is definitely huge, it's hard to make a business case to a CISO to, for example, give mindfulness breaks to all of your employees at this big organization, because if you do, they're going to be less of a target or less of a victim of a phishing attack. And they would laugh at you if you say, oh, just make sure you bring yoga instructors or mindfulness practitioners to do this for all of your people. But we're showing it in research. I've actually published papers that if people are generally practicing mindfulness, not cybersecurity mindfulness, because that is a thing, but generally mindfulness, they do better in detecting phishing emails. There is publication there. So putting the ROI the way the industry is expecting it in a business case we find it to be challenging. So the human element in cybersecurity is often difficult to quantify, and that's why it's hard to make that business case the way they expect it. And it's hard to commercialize and frequently overlooked in a capital-driven environment, as you mentioned. So what can we do? Well, it's really about human behavior, not just bad passwords, right? Not just encryption it's really their behavior. So their trust, their fear, their anxiety, their confusion, their fatigue, their exhaustion, that may be as a result of the life that they're living outside the work, or the fatigue and exhaustion as part of the actual work. They're taking all of that. So it's the person as a whole that is making those cybersecurity decisions, showing that human behavior. So ignoring that very human element of it is what's missing. And it's not just a missed opportunity, it's a critical flaw, in my opinion. So how do we change that? So I have some ideas. And it's not like these are very novel ideas, but I'd like to see more of them. So funders and institutions need to explicitly value interdisciplinary work. So we see that, at least in Canada, we have interdisciplinary panels for funding applications. So that's great. However, they need to be more generous towards an interdisciplinary application proposal. Not generous in terms of how much money, but generous in terms of the deliverables and how long it takes to actually have an organic interdisciplinary work. What doesn't work is to have a forced marriage between a social scientist and an engineer or a computer scientist. That does not work. It really needs to be organic. It takes time to understand each other, and it's very hard to publish interdisciplinary work as well. So it's publish or perish still, right? So I think they need to be more generous for these things to have an easier way to come to fruition. Another thing is we need to go back to the board and see what success look like in tech driven areas, and cybersecurity, for the most part, it's still being looked at that way. It's scale, speed, automation, but in human-centered cybersecurity, that can't work. And at least it's a missed opportunity. Another thing I want to say is that we need to build stronger bridges between researchers and people who are most affected through advocacy and through co-creation of some of these research statements, problems. So I think that would go a very long way because the advocacy groups are much closer to the actual problem that us researchers are, imagining what the problems are. And finally, I think we need to be honest. Some of this work won't be profitable in a traditional sense, and that's okay. And we should be okay with that. That's okay. And public institutions, governments are there. They exist. So universities, governments, philanthropy groups, they exist to work on what the market won't work on, right? That's why they exist. So if the market, the industry doesn't pick up on some of these, that's exactly why the public institutions exist, to pick it up. So it's important for, you know, for instance, ICIT to realize they should not necessarily just focus on commercialization, or if they do, another arm of the government should cover up the gap there. Thank you.
Very interesting, Addie. I think that perhaps forced marriage between technical and social researchers might not work for research, but it'd make a great television show. So I might put that same question over to you, Randy.
Right. I just want to, so Ken and Addie provided some really relevant context here, but when we look at the legacy of cybersecurity and the sort of the really techno-centric perspectives and approaches to cybersecurity research, we get, and even the more business-centric approaches to cybersecurity research now, we're really sort of missing the whole point that security as a human conception is highly subjective, right? And the problem is what, going back to Addie's comment about behavior, and Ken was nodding his head, there's some issues there that we have yet to even explore that go back into social psychology, a bunch of other fields, economics, even, you know, those types of things. And when I think of what I look at within organizational security as well, we keep on, you know, we trumpet on users, executive decision makers, and the technical specialists, but we don't actually study, you know, the cybersecurity thinking that's going on within an organization, or what people are thinking about with respect to cybersecurity, and not just from a user perspective, but from their jobs, the relevance of their jobs, right? And it's, again, when I was in the military, one of the things that was pounded into me was this was a matter of your own personal survival, right? And that changes your thinking about security. So that was the one thing. And the other thing I just want to sort of emphasize is Addie's comment on the co-creation. We're struggling with interdisciplinarity, I think, because often what ends up happening is somebody within one discipline gets a question, and then they invite other people into the question. And the question may not change much, but what if we had, you know, understanding, interdisciplinary meeting of the minds to come up with the question, so that we have this the perception, a common perception around the question in the first place, and we don't do a lot of that. Okay, so this idea of co-creation of research within the interdisciplinary world, I think, is really really important, because that's when you're going to actually start to see, I think, the meeting of not only the minds but the practices as we move forward in research.
So, Michael, can I jump in quickly? Just a quick comment about what Randy and Atefeh said. If you're talking to the CSO, you're talking to the wrong person here. If you want to catalyze change within an organization and deeper engagement, you need to be talking to the board chair, not even the CEO, because the CEO is operational. They have a mandate to deliver widgets or whatever it is that organization does, and that's how they're measured. That's how they get their bonus checks. The board chair has a responsibility to the governance of the organization to ensure that these kinds of threats that are potentially coming from all sorts of unknown spaces are actually being addressed by the CEO. So if the board directs an organization to actually start to invest in these kinds of things, that will catalyze change across the organization, and it'll go through the CEO to the CSO, and the CSO won't implement this anyway. It'll end up at the CIO's desk, who will then start to actually build these things, because the CSO has a very, very specific mandate, and it has very little to do with these things unless directed otherwise. So I just wanted to put that out there. You have to consider the governance of the organization in terms of how you're going to approach them.
I might sort of to switch this based on something that Ati said. You raised benefits or goods that aren't necessarily monetary, that are potentially for the benefit of a wider society. And I think that might be a good introduction to bring David in, because a lot of his work could be well classified as being something that's not going to make anybody any money, but probably something that's good for a lot of us anyway, and the kind of things that are outside the remit of what we might expect private industry to do. So David, do you have any comments on how we make sure the human element doesn't get sidelined in cybersecurity research?
Well, yeah, quite a few, I guess. I mean, I'm always the person who's like slightly skeptical about some of these things, which say you can have win-win things when it comes to making money and meeting human rights and justice needs. I think some of these things cost money, and we've got to acknowledge that it's not always going to be a case that you'll actually do better financially. We try and persuade organizations this way that they should do this and take this up, but it's not necessarily going to be the case, and certainly not immediately. So the idea that everybody's going to make money from things that are right is not actually true. Sometimes you have to suck it up, and you have to pay some money, and you have to make some investments, whether you're a government or a private corporation, to do things that are right. And also, of course, to comply with the law. It's not, let's face it. I mean, there are a lot of these things are not just things that are morally right. They're many times they're actually legally mandated, or they're in constitutions and statutes and codes of practice, and are widely ignored. We're seeing at the moment, of course, in the USA, how much ignoring these kinds of things, what it does to a society and to trust and everything else. We're seeing the widespread, complete destruction of constitutional norms, not just codes of practice, but everything right up to the Constitution of the USA itself. And so this is only a useful lesson for us thinking about cybersecurity, right? We have all these standards, we have all these things that we agree are right and we should do, and yet it is so easy in practice to go back to brute force and essentially say, make me. And this is one of the things, the bigger an organization you are, the more you can just say that essentially, well, make me. And the question then is, who is going to make you? And that's when we have, I think, a widespread lack in cybersecurity of institutions at the top level that essentially can adjudicate on these kinds of questions. Some of these things can go to the International Court of Justice, the ICC, if they're serious enough. But those things are, tend to be things like crimes against humanity, war crimes. It's very difficult, with human rights concerns to know where to go when it's at a lower level. There are European level courts, for example, but many parts of the world don't have that level of adjudication. So it's a very complex issue of what relates to what's right, what's legal, and how we do that. But it's certainly not going to make you money, unless you're a lawyer, perhaps.
I think that might be a good spot to bring Pascal back in. Pascal, you're very much working with groups, and your organization is where the rubber meets the road in a lot of cases. So what have you seen, or what are your concepts to make sure that the human-centric cybersecurity stuff isn't left out?
Yeah, it's a broad topic, as we can tell from all the answers. And bringing it back maybe to the original sense of the question, I think part of the problem is that there is a bias that the human side of cybersecurity is not as valuable as, let's call it, the STEM side. And for people who have that STEM side, like it's not only a real bias, but it's also partly true. I mean, it's a perspective that has to change, and a lot of stuff on the human side has been focused on very, very high level, just security awareness, like very basic stuff, and we haven't really gotten to the meat that much, especially not in industry, right? In academia, just looking at what you guys have done with the Human-Centric partnership, there's a lot that's been produced and published, and it's very interesting, and we can see a lot of avenues for materializing that in industry. But really, if you talk to people in industry and they have that STEM-based background in cyber, and they understand, look, within 30 minutes, any offensive team will break into pretty much any company in Canada, any good offensive team, and I have the stats to back it up. So that's the biggest problem, right? There are technology level failures everywhere, but then you have to expand and extend and say, wait a minute, why is it broken? It's broken because people don't proactively identify assets, they don't manage vulnerabilities, they don't patch, they don't do secure configuration management. And why don't they do it? Well, is it people are lazy? People are not conscious of the problem? No, they're very conscious of the problem. But why aren't these things getting prioritized? And then you start getting into the human aspect of things, understanding motivations, understanding what gets done, why it gets done, what doesn't get done, why. Why do we have technical debt that creates all these cybersecurity issues? There are reasons for that, and they're rooted in human behavior and decisions that can be studied, anthropologically, from a sociology, psychology standpoint, economic standpoint. Like, all of these things are extremely important and interesting and should be applied to practice. And how do you apply it to practice? Well, it can be, straight at the policy level to enforce activities and create capabilities that will monitor those human behaviors that lead to cybersecurity problems. And they're not, I clicked on the wrong thing, because I think that's not really where we need to go with this human-centric part. The reality is, we have the technology and the means to stop those links from getting clicked, right? We have the technology right now to stop a lot of, if not all, phishing attacks, and even the very targeted ones. So we have a responsibility as technologists to build secure products and make sure that they work well as intended. I don't like using humans as an excuse and putting the onus back on the user. That is a practice that is inherently wrong. Anyway, I don't want to take all the time, but it's very, very interesting stuff there. But that bias of STEM versus not STEM is very strong. And even, I think, in the funding, prior to the wonderful work that NCC is doing, and the way that Ken is bringing that forward, I think it was really much. Are you on I said CSRNG, sorry for using the French acronym, versus SHIRK, and those things were separate and you couldn't really work together. I know, because I co-founded Serene Risk, right? So I've been in that circuit for a long time. So I think we're moving forward, but there's still a strong bias academically, in industry, and in government as well.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting irony that there are a set of biases that are preventing people from integrating an understanding of biases into cybersecurity. I might turn it to Mark now. You've been sitting here listening to all of the Canadians talk about this particular issue. I'll bring it to you to round out this question.
Yeah, I do think it's interesting as kind of like there is a kind of prevailing piece of humor, I suppose, about sorry, am I? Yes, I am. So I am not muted. It's a prevailing piece of humor. Cybersecurity would be great if it wasn't for the people. And that's kind of odd, isn't it? Because you wouldn't need cybersecurity if you didn't have people. So there is a kind of, the fact that there's even a question that human factors should be left out is kind of almost feels like that question is framed in the wrong way. And I liked Randy's kind of thing about thinking about co-designing the questions. I do feel that is really important. That there isn't that kind of real grassroots beginning of a problem discussion about what it is you're trying to solve. And it feels like cybersecurity should fundamentally be human. And it's not atechnical, but it is definitely something which at the root should be human, rather than thinking about something that's kind of added on at the end. So there's almost like a back to front way of thinking about the fundamental problems. I think the other thing I would say that gets left out of this conversation sometimes is values. So there's, what are the why questions here? So why are we doing that? You mentioned trust and ethics in here. I think that's kind of really important. So what is important in terms of what do human beings actually want out of this technology? Whether it's the cybersecurity or something of which cybersecurity is being applied to. And how does that going to undermine some other fundamental things like trust? So I think actually getting back to starting from sometimes at least, that where the human beings are starting from rather than where the technology is starting from is really important. So I think those are the two things I would kind of draw out. So values being kind of pulled more into the conversation, starting with the human sometimes rather than starting with the technology.
Thanks very much for that. So we have one question left and very little time left to answer it. So we might run this somewhat like a lightning round, where I'll give each of you a minute to answer the question. And what we're looking at here is the question of interdisciplinary research. It has been raised. It's already come up in the conversation that we've had so far. But we've got an incredibly experienced panel. So what I want to ask you is, from your experience, you've been involved in these kinds of research, and you've seen things that work and you've seen things that don't work. So what I want to ask is, what does successful interdisciplinary collaboration look like? What is it like when it works? And keep in mind, this is going to be a very hard question to answer in the amount of time that I'm going to give you, because I'm going to give you about a minute each to share what's probably a lifetime of experience. So I'm going to run through each of you nice and quickly, and hopefully we'll get an idea of what interdisciplinary collaboration looks like in practice. And I'm going to start with you, Atty.
Thank you. I think I already mentioned that it has to be organic, and I'll take the minute to tell you more about what I mean by organic. So successful collaboration usually starts with mutual respect. I've seen cases where, a social scientist was brought to just to check a box to say we are interdisciplinary, a bunch of technical scholars. That's not good. And then technical folks are only invited to code the tool, a bunch of social scientists. So that's not good. Everyone needs to be on equal a seat at the table, and it takes time. And it's critical to build that level of trust and respect and lexicon and common language and evidence and this and that over time. So it may not be something that can be achieved very quickly. We need to be patient. And in order to make that in the future, I think we need people with dual degrees in cybersecurity. And let's make dual degrees in cybersecurity so the future scholars actually come equipped with all of this. I'll leave it at that.
Perfect. So I'll move from Atty to Randy.
Right. So I agree with Atty regarding the interdisciplinary programs. That's where interdisciplinarity will start. But the other thing I want to do is I want to bring up Pascal's previous discussion about reality confrontation. And I think what we see here is when we start talking about this in an interdisciplinary way, we don't necessarily have enough appreciation and understanding of the different realities that are in play. And they are very different realities, as everybody's sort of alluded to, and where and when these realities may clash. And understanding those realities before we actually launch into the research is really kind of an important thing to do. That's it for me. Less than a minute.
Perfect. To you, Pascal.
Yes, very quickly. So, I mean, one of my best experiences in living this successful multidisciplinary collaboration was, not random. It was coerced, because I was a CEO and I was able to, hire the people that I wanted in my research team, and I took engineers that were studying command and control systems and malware, and that were tracking malware actors, but from a very technical side. And I brought this brilliant lady, Mashatan, who is now a professor at Université de Montréal, to look at the cybercrime and economic angle of it. And then that led to very prolific work. And so it can be directed. It doesn't have to be, this super organic thing. So I think industry has a role to play in making those things happen, right? Identifying outcomes that matter to industry, and bringing the different types of scientists and academics that are required to get it done. And we also had great success later on by bringing in an anthropologist into the team, just to say how diverse we were able to grow that team. So that's it. That's my 2 cents. But there's more within the CyberEco stuff.
I'll move it over to you, David.
Yeah, thank you. I agree actually with both the organic and the coerced approach. I think that they both have their places. I took part in a very interesting workshop last year, which was an unconference format, i.e., a no agenda 5-day event that was called Fundamental Issues Between Computer Science and Social Sciences and the Humanities in the Netherlands. And basically, we had to construct from the beginning. It was people across multiple disciplines. We had to construct our own agenda, decide what the fundamental questions were, start to arrange ways of talking about them. We did all kinds of different things. And it was a really interesting experience because all of us had to sort of abandon our preconceptions and listen to people from the beginning, however uncomfortable that might have been. And I think by the end, we just about worked out what some of the fundamental questions were after 5 days. But I'm actually thinking of following this up and doing an event like this next year in Canada. So look out for that. The other thing I just wanted to mention is that the training is absolutely vital. We're going to be starting a new MA program, a 12-month intensive taught MA at the University of Ottawa called Critical Surveillance and Security Studies, which will do exactly this kind of interdisciplinary education for people who are already professionals, already working in government, but who want to get this more rounded approach to how to understand these things. And that should be starting in late 2026, but so look out for that as well.
Perfect. And to you, Mark?
Yeah, I think really just to echo what everybody else has said in a slightly different way, I think it's relational. So it is a relationship. There is a kind of overhead necessary to get that relationship started. You have to do a lot of talking before you can do any research, but then you have to carry on talking in order to maintain the relationship, because your field will be moving on, their field will be moving on. So you keep having to have these conversations to make sure you're still on the same page. So that's necessary overhead. I think the benefits, almost always in my case, outweigh the costs. The benefits you get from absorbing somebody else's perspective on a problem almost always adds to your own understanding of the problem. So that is definitely my preferred way of operating, but it is, you do have to acknowledge you have to work at it like any relationship.
Wonderful. And Ken, you have the last minute.
Okay, perfect. So this means that I can say something totally controversial and it will not be contradicted. I actually don't think interdisciplinary and these kinds of multidisciplinary initiatives work, because I think we all live in our own tribes and we end up going back to the thinking the way our own tribes do. If you really want to do this, create a discipline called cybersecurity. Okay, and then bring all of the people who can make a contribution under that umbrella, and that will cause true catalytic change. So cybersecurity is computer science, it is engineering, it is mathematics, it is sociology, it is law, it is public policy, it is a ton of different disciplines who think about things from a cybersecurity and privacy focused kind of way. And that way, the conversation is around cybersecurity. It's not around the application of public policy to cybersecurity. And I think if you get to that point, you truly will be transformative in actually moving the needle.
Wonderful. And if you have a disagreement with what Ken said, the comments are there. Go wild. So with that, thank you everyone for your time. It's been a very interesting panel, and we've been blessed by such a range of experiences, perspectives, backgrounds, and insights. So thank you very much. Thank you very much to our audience. This has been the Human-Centric Cybersecurity Partnership's contribution to SECREV for 2025. And given that we won't be around next year, the last contribution that the Human-Centric Cybersecurity Partnership will make to this event. Thank you very much for your time to the panelists, and thank you very much for your time to the audience.